I'm a registered psychologist here in Australia, and the journey started in developing a private practice with my wife. Very quickly understood and ran into the complexities of running a practice. We always assumed that the difficulty of running a practice would be the seeing patients and providing treatment and everything that goes with that. But actually we found no, it's the admin, it's the paperwork, it's the compliance. And so we started looking for a good technology solution and quickly found that really there was nothing.
Want to attract and convert more leads? Want to learn how digital PR, branding, and SEO can establish and build your brand identity? Welcome to the Market Movers Building Brands and Links with Linkify podcast. We answer these questions and help you ramp up your brand visibility and credibility. Let's cut through the noise and make your business the talk of the town. We're your hosts, Nick and Chris. Let's get this show on the road.
Welcome to the Market Movers podcast. Today we are joined by Damien Adler, co-founder of Zander Health and a registered psychologist who scaled a practice into one of the leading global practice management platforms for allied health clinics. Really looking forward to diving into this one today. Welcome to the show, Damien.
Thanks for having me.
Damien, great to have you on. To start, if you could introduce yourself and then tell us about your journey from psychologist to founding Zanda.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, Damien Adler, I'm a registered psychologist here in Australia, and the journey started in developing a private practice with my wife. She's also a psychologist, and so we started a private practice, and very quickly understood and ran into the complexities of running a practice. And we always assumed that the difficulty of running a practice would be the seeing patients and providing treatment and everything that goes with that. But actually we found no, it's the admin, it's the paperwork, it's the compliance. And so we started looking for a good technology solution and quickly found that really there was some big players on the market, but really nothing that we felt was very good. And a very long story short, I co-founded with my brother. So a brother, Paul, had actually sold a technology company he had built, and he had grown that company to be Australia's leading provider of small and medium-sized computer support for companies here. And so he just sold that. And I thought this could be a good partnership because he has the technical background, and I'm getting a really strong sense of what you need to run a private practice efficiently. And so partnered with him, and we founded what is now Zanda. And from there, it started extremely small. So we bootstrapped from day one. We've never taken any external investment. We literally started with a handful of clients, and we were one of them, our practice, so our own private practice. And there's that, the saying of eating your own dog food, is where you literally are using your own product. And so you're highly motivated to make it work. And it was just him and I to begin with. And so whilst I was running the practice, private practice, along with my wife, and I was seeing clients, and it was very much an emerging, growing. So I was support between my sessions. I was marketing. I was doing, in fact, I built the first website, things like that, and balancing that all around the clinical work, which is, of course, where primary income was coming from. And Paul was my brother Paul was a solo engineer to begin with. So we started from extremely humble and very lean beginnings. And that was over 15 years ago now. And it has since grown, largely organically. We've been a product-led, company. And so where we are today, so we're now, we have key markets in Australia, UK, other parts of Europe, and then North America. And we have teams located in each of those areas now too. So it started as a very tiny idea that we had no idea if it would work or whether what I thought might be useful to running practices, if that was something that anyone else at all, would relate to. And then, luckily, it's worked out really well.
That's awesome. Okay, my first question is, what does a household argument look like between a husband and wife when you're both psychologists?
I was thinking that too. And then business partners as well. It's like most couples are playing checkers and you guys are playing chess, right?
Yeah. This is it. You know what? We had some ground rules when we first started, because we actually started working even before we set up a private practice. We were both working in the public health system. So that's actually where I first got my first psychology experience and working as a psychologist. And we had ground rules about how much we could talk about work at home. And so we had very limited amounts of time. But the other thing that is, we cancel each other out, right? So neither of us can use any particular sort of communication techniques or can use any strategies covertly, because the other one is just bang, spot it, shoot it down. And look, I'd like to say, in the best, theoretically, we should have the best type of communication skills. It doesn't always play out like that. I can assure you, we make all the same mistakes that every other couple does. So we really are. We're really not. Preaching from up high at all on this in this way anyway.
That's great. Okay, so Damien, when you first started, you were still managing your private practice. You never hired a traditional sales team. You've been a product-led company. So how did that transition from going bootstrapping and running the private practice whilst trying to grow this company? How did you grow it to a point where you could sell the practice and jump in full time? What did that strategy look like?
So there was a lot of a crossover, essentially. What we did is I continued to work full time, and I had a caseload of my own, as well as managing, because we grew the psychology practice to be quite large as well. And the way that it worked is I would get super busy doing both, and then we bit by bit hired additional support to help. So the first trainee that we hired, in fact, for Zanda, was someone who was 19 years old, fresh. It was the level we could afford to employ at that time was a school leaver with no background in technology, right? But we hired very well, and that person, Claire, this is now say 13 years later, is still with us today. And in fact, is one of our senior product people that set the entire direction of our company, and it leads our product strategy along with another product manager. And so we hired well, and slowly just built up the team as each role, if you like. I'd split off part of what I was doing and hire for that sort of position. So initially that was support. So that was Claire joined us with support. I was still doing a lot of, in fact, doing all the marketing and everything at that stage. And I was still doing all the product demonstrations. So we would demonstrate the product. So I'd literally do a clinical consultation, and then what's on next? Okay, I'm doing a demonstration for Zanda. I would do the demonstration, straight out of that, go back into clinical work. And there was a lot of that went for quite a few years. What happened though is that we have very good feedback loops, and we still do from this day, listening to what our customers want. So initially it was sort of ideas that I had, but very quickly we really wanted to loop in our customers, as small as they were. I still remember when we had a goal to get to 100 customers, and we had like one of those thermometers on the wall, where you tick off like a fundraising goal, but we were like, how many customers? Right from those early days, we would engage customers and help them tell us what they wanted, what they needed, what would make a difference. And so with that, the platform started to grow. We got more and more customers, a lot of that via word of mouth. And then what I started to do is then taper off the amount of direct clinical work that I was doing. And we actually started hiring more and more psychologists so that we could still grow that side of the business. But I was spending less and less time doing clinical work. So then was doing some management in the practice, and then the rest of the time on Zanda. And then eventually it got to the point where I stopped working in the clinic at all, other than providing a little bit of management. But my wife and we put in a practice manager as well that was running that. And we moved Zanda out of that office, because we were all sharing an office space at one stage as well. So it got kind of cramped. And so we moved out. It became, we grew up and we graduated out of our practice. And then actually around that time, COVID hit. And so we went remote, fully remote at that point. So already at that stage, we had the team sort of 50-50. But at that point, we closed the office that we had not long moved into. And we've now stayed fully remote ever since then.
It's nice to have that option. It's like the clinic is sort of funding and you're sharing office space, and the cost to start it without the clinic in place would have been much higher. But yeah,
Totally, completely different proposition. Like, because it actually allowed me to, and because the clinic was doing well, it meant that we could derive a primary income actually from the clinic and reinvest everything that Zanda was making back into Zanda. And so that was very, it was a good way, to do it, in that it allowed one to support the other. And like you say, the office space was being paid for by the practice, and so we didn't have the additional overhead.
Yeah, it's a great way to start. So those very first clients, before the word of mouth starts to kick in, where did those come from? Are those you're like hitting up your friends that are in the space? Or are you going to psychologist banquets and be like, oh, you're still struggling with that? Oh, I don't have that problem anymore. Check out my tool. Like, where did those first customers come from?
We had the very origins of Xander was actually this shell of a program that someone had actually started to kind of work on and was abandoned, essentially, right? And we'd sort of cottoned on to this and had sort of made some contact with this person, and they had a few other users on the platform. As when I say a few, we're talking about like 5 users or something, right, on the platform. And so when we first sort of started, we thought, well, we'll grab that, right, and we'll use that as a bit of a base. So those very, very first ones came from there. Once we started, I rang them and started talking to them, and I'd speak to them on a regular basis about what's going well, what they'd like to improve. Once they got a sense of that we were really going to make something unique and something that was genuinely helpful, and that we were coming from within the profession, they actually started telling their friends and their colleagues. And so we started to kind of grow that way as well. And then I wrote this website, and I did it in WordPress. I didn't know a lot in those days. And then this is very, very basic SEO, and I know this is your I'm talking to experts here, but I literally wrote a few pages in those early days that I thought people might be interested in, and those pages ranked. Right,
Yeah.
like here we were, these tiny little company, but I thought, oh, what are people interested in? And just wrote some basic content that I thought people might want to know about. So like, what's cloud-based software? What's practice management system for health professions? Just some really basic, and that stuff ranked. And as it started to rank, of course, we got more traffic, which then Google went, hey, this site seems to be interesting to people. And then that sort of started some organic SEO. And from there, I got a little bit more interested in it and started to figure out some other things that we could do. And that website now is so basic that I use that as a humorous example when I'm like doing some presentations about like where we started and where we are now. But the truth of it is, it actually it worked. And we started to then, get some momentum. So we didn't have any kind of marketing department or anything until really it would have been, probably 6-7 years ago, maybe. Like for a good half of our entire life, we didn't have even a formal marketing department operating.
And is Google organic search traffic still a large portion of your or a substantial portion of your leads and conversions? Your website has an extremely strong domain authority. It's a DR80 according to Ahrefs, and you have a healthy looking traffic line. So I know that we spoke before and you talked about education being a huge part, but I mean, this organic free traffic, which everybody said had died like a year ago, is still treating you very well. So I'm wondering, are you still hyper focused on keeping that as part of a strategy?
We are. In fact, now if you track it over time, because we had a rebrand a year and a half ago. So we used to be called Power Diary, and we had a complete rebrand. And as you can imagine, and we knew this was coming, but it was going to take it because we had to reestablish the domain, even though we did all the things that you're supposed to do in terms of redirecting and making sure we, tried to keep Google happy. But, our ranking took a domain authority anyway, took a hit, and we were expecting that. And we had a timeline that we had to kind of build that back out and to reestablish that kind of 80 ballpark that you're talking about. And luckily we were able to do that. And we actually got there faster than what we had originally anticipated, that we'd be able to. So we were going not only we kind of shot ourselves in the foot, which we knew was happening, but we really wanted to rebrand, but also going against the tide, as you said, because there's been, a lot of sort of negativity and concern around whether this sort of stuff still matters. It, in our experience, matters significantly. And we do put a lot of focus, on that. And really the way that we try and do it, we've got a bunch of different things that we do, but it really still goes back to that old principle of generating content that's truly interesting, to people. So we'll be strategic, about it. Like we'll be looking at what opportunities there are to rank, what things, and we'll sort of overlap that with what is genuinely interesting, because we know that, of course, Google looks at not just can you land the traffic, but can you stick it, and do people, sit there and read it, and do they go on to other things? So, but the anchor of it, is that, will this actually provide some sort of value to the reader?
Yeah. So, okay, SEO clearly not dead for your site, but have you seen a shift in the kind of context? A lot of sites, they say we didn't see a lot of their traffic decreased, but overall the leads still stayed the same. So they were losing traffic to a lot of informational content. You said early days it was driven primarily through educational content. So has there been a shift in the traffic coming in?
Not really, and we've kind of doubled and tripled down on that strategy of education, and we've found, and we do that across, so that we get this sort of somewhat of a network effect. So we'll do webinars, if there's value that we can add in other people's spaces, we'll do guest appearances and assist in other ways too. So that kind of we get. Then, of course, we get some link building, things like that, of course, which you guys are, of course, very, all over. But so we do try and broaden, our footprint in that way, as well. And some of it, it has, some of it is purely experimental. We're not necessarily sure whether particular content or particular channel may provide a lift, and we'll try it out and just see and essentially track, what happens and what happens to our overall domain ranking.
And how important has a face behind the education been? So a personal brand associated with the business brand, has that been part of the strategy? And is that something which obviously we know now in the world of AI search, the brand is significantly important, and outside of just the brand authority of the business, but the people behind it. So I'm interested where that fits in.
Yeah, we have found that to be important. We sort of had a thesis that it would be, but the in our space, and when we look at our competitors, there tends to be a little bit nameless, faceless, right? Is often, and that the technology is there and is kind of put forward, but the kind of the story behind it and the reason for it to exist, is something that's kind of lost. And in our view, what we're sort of really aiming to do is really, we're genuinely passionate about it. I mean, as a psychologist, a lot of my friends are in the health profession. I know and live and breathe in my everyday life, like what that's like running practices. And so we want to kind of bring that insight, but also like empathy and understanding of what that's like, and bring that a product to market, but not just a product, more of an ecosystem around that. In terms of webinars and training, and we, even if I can, plug, we wrote a book on, ways and strategies, to grow successful practices, because in our sort of view, there's not enough training done through
Mhm.
university to prepare people for the business side of operating health practices. And then it's natural because it's something I like talking about. I mean, I immerse myself in this every day. We are always looking at how do we make life easier for practitioners and help them be profitable businesses, right? Not
Mhm.
just provide great services to patients, and that's great. And they need to do that. But it's a business, and it needs to generate a return and a reward for the practice owners that are investing their time and money and energy into it. So for us, yeah, having a person and having a face helps sort of personalize it, but it really is a natural extension. It's not something we kind of went, okay, let's strategically sit there and
Mhm.
work it out. We're like, hey, look, this is an area we feel passionately about. It's stuff I love talking about. It's something that I'm always sort of got my ear open to figure out, listening to how we can do things better. And so it's sort of naturally emerged that way that it's often, it's often me out there and, we get on LinkedIn and, share certain content on LinkedIn, certain content on our blog, certain stuff on our Facebook pages and so forth to attend, to what different audiences might find useful and helpful.
I think the training part is huge because I think in the SaaS space, there's a lot of tools that they are faceless, like you mentioned, and that I mean, you're missing out on an entire lead generation part. So actually, I wanted to ask, like, how does this fit into your overall growth strategy? You have the book, you have the webinars. What is the overall strategy for the education and then getting people into your ecosystem?
Yeah, so they have different pathways that people find us, but it's for us the way that we look at it. It's all about providing value. It's all anchored around value. So we never do like a webinar presentation, a podcast appearance, or any of those things unless we think there might be something that we can offer that's going to provide value or an insight or perspective that will sort of help someone else. Behind the scenes, the mechanics of it I think there's nothing too revolutionary in that we will have lead gen captures, and so we'll be able to capture so if we're providing giveaways or we're providing something again that will be of value, but we'll capture the contact details and so forth of potential customers. We'll then put them onto into some funnels that might be relevant, so we'll put them into a newsletter funnel or to some sort of drip sequence. Again, where we think that because we watch our unsubscribes very closely, we want to make sure that they enjoy getting our content and we're not, harassing them. But so we'll get them into a pipeline and get them also kind of familiar with us and the brand and the philosophy that is behind it. And so part of our growth strategy is that familiarity, because if you think about making a decision about where you're going to put your patient data, right? So when you're a practitioner, you have a lot of, regulatory kind of overlays. You've got reputational risk, and you've got your professional standards. And so deciding where to put your data is actually a big decision. It's more than just sort of purchasing some software that might help me in my business some way. There's a lot more that goes to it. And so part of our kind of thinking is, if you know the company and you know the people and you know what we're about, then when it comes time to either change practice management systems or start your own practice, we're going to be the natural selection or the natural choice because like, hey, I know that team. And hopefully people then have had multiple touch points. So it means that we're not kind of going in cold and just trying to dump a whole lot of money into Google or Facebook or something, and try and get these kind of cold leads and then convert them, in a very short space of time into customers. We're trying to build that sense of familiarity. And then on top of that, we layer that with objective evidence, because, it's good and well if people find our content interesting, but that could also be self-referential, right? Like we could be quite, like anyone, you've got, you want to promote your business. So we do things like we have external auditors that audit our compliance for, say, GDPR, the HIPAA compliance with the ISO 27001, which is our, the external security standards. And so we will bring in external auditors so that we can say, okay, yes, hopefully, if you're reading our content and you see what we do, we know what we're doing. We've built a solid product and we've been around for a long time, but also we're not just sort of patting ourselves on the back. We are getting external auditors to kind of have a look and give us that kind of clean insights and oversight into, what we're doing. So we try and bring all those things together. And then from a growth point of view, that tends to lead to, like, we have very good conversion rates of people that start, a trial with us. The likelihood of them converting is, by industry standards, very high. And that's, we think, because there's these multiple touch points that are out there, and hopefully people have experienced. So that's the approach that we've taken. And part of it has become because we've been bootstrapped, right? Like, we had to think about it creatively. We haven't, as I'm sure you're aware, that you get a lot of activity from, investors and people that sort of have, great ideas about what, if they buy in. But because we've had to be very disciplined, with how we expend, our capital, we've sort of needed to do it in a way that's built around trust and value, rather than, trying to buy our way into the market.
Yeah, super interesting. I asked you before we came on if I could ask you a controversial question towards the end. I think you've touched on it slightly. You said it was okay.
I like it. Go for it.
I've got like a ChatGPT Plus subscription. I've got Codex vibe coding tool. I'm pretty good at asking it to make what I want. Like, is there a fear that practice owners now can just go ahead and vibe code themselves exactly what it is that you offer? Do you feel like you have some form of moat to protect you from these vibe coding tools? And how do you see the future of this business over the next few years?
Yeah, so look, that's a really good question. One we've thought about, right? This is, something that, always you're looking for changes and things that emerge in the market. First of all, I think the vibe coding, AI stuff, I love it, right? I do it myself as well, right? And I'm not the developer, I'm not like the, I'm not a developer, but I do all that too, because it's great fun, good to play with, and very pro. The way that I would, and the reason that we don't feel threatened is because there are some things that are really good and good fun, and you should, vibe code and experience. Just like there are building projects that you can take on yourself, and why not build the cubby house, build a chicken shed, maybe build yourself a garage. Okay, now would you build though, a 2-story house if that's not your thing, without an architect, without a builder, right? Or in a similar kind of way, I might build a model aeroplane that's fun to go and play with my daughter and zoom it around out in the field somewhere, but I would not build my own aeroplane, right? That I'm going to fly and put my family in. Okay. So when we look at it and we look at, could people kind of vibe code, they could vibe code for sure, a bunch of things that would sort of serve a purpose. But is it going to be compliant? Is it going to be reliable? Is it going to keep the data safe? Is it going to keep it encrypted? Where is the data going to be stored? There are so many kind of dimensions to this. I would put the analogy of, would you build your own aeroplane, right? And how would you feel about that? And would you, because when we think about our obligations for disclosure to clients, like, would you feel comfortable saying to your clients, all your data is stored on something that I vibe coded
last night?
Last night, right? That's right. If you wouldn't be comfortable saying that, it's probably a flag that you shouldn't be doing it. I do think, though, that there are some extensions of that people will vibe code that will connect with platforms like ours. And I think this is something that will be an interesting thing to see what develops in the future. But, I can certainly foresee a world where people want, a particular type of report or dashboard or way of displaying a metric that's really relevant to their business that maybe wouldn't make sense for us to build, because it's an unusual use case. It's something that there's not going to be general value to our customer base. So we're unlikely to sort of invest the time in building that. But I can see a scenario where people that are vibe coding are going to be able to say, well, look, I want this sort of unusual feature that's super important to me, and build it in a way that connects with the core systems that that they're using. And I actually think that could be a really exciting thing that happens because, we'll be able to remain focused on the features that are really kind of complicated, that involve a lot of security. Everything involves a lot of security, privacy, compliance. And a lot of our stuff, is more complicated when it's integrating with health insurance claiming systems and things like that, which are complicated to build. So we can focus on doing those sort of big ticket items. And it may be not too distant future where people can build things that, that we add really good value for them, but are not mission critical, and where they don't need to, be as concerned about, all the other things that we spend our days and nights sort of thinking about and ensuring is compliant.
I think that's a great way to look at it. If you think about like Shopify, all the add-ons they have, it doesn't, it's not competition. It actually enhances the features, more features. It makes your product more valuable. I think in the short to medium term, like the bigger threat, not really for you guys, but in this space is more competitors. So not necessarily individual practices vibe coding their own thing, but a lot of just suddenly there's a new option. But this is where your 15 years of brand building come into play. They're just going to struggle to compete. And there's a lot of spaces where you have one or two big players and there's a lot of really small players. And so I think there'll be more options for like the sort of starting out practices. But yeah, you're exactly right. You're really, if you're a big practice, you're concerned with your data. You want to make sure that like the provider you're using has everything checked. So I think like long term, it'll be interesting to see how it goes, but I think it can only be good for you guys because you could have more features, easier to add on, or like you're talking about like plugins and that kind of thing. So it'll be very interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that the other side to this for established is, remembering that we've got this great team of developers. Now, those developers are now augmented with AI, right? So we're adopting the AI technology, fast as well. So we're getting our experienced engineers that, that were doing a great job before AI came along. And so they're now producing things faster and better and quicker than ever before, right? So it also means that where we are from the starting blocks, it's not like it's just new competitors coming along because you're like, oh, you're racing? Well, we are too, and so we're, which is great fun. Like it's a whole, we've been implementing AI all the way through our whole sort of development pipeline, so that we can do things faster and better. So we're actually able to provide more value and quicker and faster than we've ever been able to do historically. So it's an exciting time. And look, I think with any of this sort of stuff, people fret and they get worried. And you know what? Most of the time it works out. If you're adaptable and you roll with it and you adapt it and say, what's the opportunity here and how do we make the most of it? Then you can spend a lot of time, worrying, or you can go, all right, let's have some fun with this and see what we can do with it and take it to the next level. So that's the position we've been taking, and our team's having a great time.
That's awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's one of the things that people like really did overlook when all these AI vibe coding tools came out and everyone said, oh, everyone can make anything now. Like somebody vibe coded Calendly, I think like in a night or something. And then, Calendly's still around, but all of these teams that have got like excellent coders and devs anyway, that are now, like you said, augmented with this, going to be ahead of the competition anyway. So super exciting. Damien, it has been amazing having you on. Thank you so much for being a guest. If people want to find you or reach out, where can they do that?
Yeah, easiest way is they can go to zanderhealth.com is our main website. If they look at Damien Adler, they'll find me on LinkedIn or on X or all those sort of places as well. So if you just Google Damien Adler or Zander Health, you'll find us everywhere.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Damien. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Thanks.